Hello, can everybody hear me? Okay, well, I'll go ahead and start. And the session is going to be recorded, so I'll send out a link to everyone afterwards, as well as people who might not have been able to make it during the scheduled time. This is connecting the dots, conducting literature reviews. I've been asked for some time. People have been asking a lot of questions about how to do literature reviews, and so I um, decided to put together this presentation. I think it will be the first of, I think we'll do this over again several times. And this will have to be very broad because there's a lot of people from different subject areas. So I think in the future, we might do some that are more specifically targeted to one discipline or another. But for now, this one will be very broad, and I'm sure I'll learn a lot. And I would welcome any feedback that you have about anything else that you need to know that won't be covered. I have some colleagues who are monitoring the chat. So if anybody has a question or something that they don't understand or that they want answered, you can put it into the chat, and they will they'll either answer you directly, or they'll convey to me what the question is, or we'll answer it later if there's not any time during this session. My name is Scott Lancaster, and I've been here at A&M Commerce in the library for 22 years. Before that, I was here in the 80s to work on a master's degree, and I was actually here in the 70s when my mother was here. So I've been at A&M Commerce for a long time. But since I've been here in 98 when I started, the way that research is done in the library has changed a lot. And so I'm sure that some of you are very comfortable with doing the type of research that is done online, but it's a little bit different in the databases than it would be in using the internet. So we'll cover that a little bit. But today we're mainly looking at how to write a literature review and what to do. And it'll be kind of a broad overview of what a literature review is. I've done a lot of literature reviews myself. And I've done research for a number of years. I've been in 2 doctoral programs, and in both of those, like I had to go in the first one, I had to go to Australia to do the library research that I needed to do, and in the second one, I started out going to England as well as the Folger Library in Washington D.C. But now I think I could probably do everything that I did just online now. And I wouldn't get to travel, but I wouldn't have to travel either. So you don't even have to come into the library here to do the research that I'm going to be sort of telling you to how we might do. My particular background is in literary and historical research, but I've been on around 15 or 20 dissertation committees in one of the education fields since I have been working here as a librarian. So I've had to sort of learn a lot about research in that field. And then a few years ago, I did a study of the STEM master's theses here and learned a lot about, I was doing a citation analysis and looking at what people were citing in their theses. And I'd already done one on the dissertation. So I have some familiarity with the types of things people are citing. And actually I was very surprised with the differences that, like with computer science or math and between the biology and chemistry. So I feel like I'm able to sort of help, people in doing any kind of research, as well as maneuver around the kind of pitfalls that you might encounter. Can you see the PowerPoint that I've made that has okay. what we're going to go over mainly here is broadly kind of the purpose of a literature review, as well as a little bit about selecting sources, identifying keywords, and developing search strategies, and maybe a little bit about evaluating resources, but it's going to be very broad. First, what is a literature review? A literature review is a synthesis, but not a summary, of previous work in a specific area. It should bring together different aspects of the literature in that area and create something new with it. The result is a critical evaluation of the current theory and methods of a particular topic, reflecting what is known, how it is known, and especially what is unknown, because that's what you are presumably bringing forth in your research. What is the objective of a literature review? The objective of the literature review is to provide the reader with the knowledge needed to understand your research project, whether it's a thesis or a dissertation or a longer research paper or a grant proposal or whatever it might be. It's not an explanation of everything you know about a particular subject. Because of this distinction, you need to first perform a thorough investigation of the literature and then synthesize only the material relevant to your research question. So you're going to start out really very broadly trying to, look at everything, and then you narrow it down. And especially when you get to the writing phase, there will be things that you might have used as background research just to familiarize yourself with the topic, or perhaps you read and decided to go another direction, but it still kind of fed into your understanding of that area. But it's very important to hone down in the literature review the material that you're using so that it's just focused on what you need. And it's sort of like entering in the conversation about scholarly communication is what it's called now. And choosing a general thesis or dissertation topic will be relatively easy to some of you. I mean, it'll be something that you enjoyed the most as you're going through your classes, or that you understood the best, or that is the most relevant to whatever your career goals are. But deciding on a specific and realistic research questions requires significant thought and extensive inquiry. So you're really starting out having to do a lot of research into whatever specific fields you've chosen, so that you can further narrow it down and find a research question that would be relevant and useful and applicable to whatever your goals are. Appropriate and relevant research questions and the methods employed to answer them must be framed in the context of existing research. That's very important, that you understand where the conversation is now in that field. And there's research that I did on things back in the 80s that really wouldn't be relevant now, because people have moved on. They're talking about something else. And so it's important that you constantly be kind of on the lookout for new research that's coming out in the field that you're interested in. Especially if you're like me and take 10 years to finish a doctorate, then things can change quite a bit over that time. And I don't know if you've heard of this metaphor called the Burkean parlor. I really like it. There's a link. I'm going to send this presentation out to you so you'll have it, but you'll see a link down here to a YouTube video. It's only a minute and a half. I found that I really can't show it where you can hear it properly over Zoom. So if you're interested, you can look at that yourself. But the Burkean parlor is a metaphor that rhetorician Kenneth Burke came up with in 1973 that compares the collaborative effort that makes up scholarly communication as an unending conversation. And the text of it actually is here in this slide. And I think I'll read this. Imagine that you enter a parlor. You come late. When you arrive, others have long preceded you and they're engaged in a heated discussion, a discussion too heated for them to pause and tell you exactly what it is about. In fact, the discussion had begun long before any of them got there, so that no one present is qualified to retrace for you all the steps that had gone before. You listen for a while until you decide that you have caught the tenor of the argument. Then you put in your oar. Someone answers. You answer him. Another comes to your defense. Another aligns himself against you, to either the embarrassment or gratification of your opponent, depending upon the quality of your ally's assistance. However, the discussion is interminable. The hour grows late. You must depart. And you do depart with the discussion still vigorously in process. So this is what, this was a big transition I found for myself as I, was in graduate school to sort of move from being someone who is consuming information and scholarship to someone who is hopefully producing it. And as you write papers, the focus is for you to become more and more adept at that. Just like in this conversation, how when you come into this room in the beginning, you don't really know what's going on, and you listen, you figure it out, and then you start tentatively entering the conversation, like with the papers that you write. And now that you're ready to write a major work, this is when you are trying to make a major contribution. And that's why the literature review is really important, because it puts that conversation, it makes that conversation in context with what you're trying to do. And the major goals of a literature review, through the process of creating a literature review, you should refine the scope of your research, rationalize the significance of the research problem, because it can't just be something you're interested in. You need to show that there's a reason that it's significant, a reason that that question needs to be answered. Distinguish what has been done from what needs to be done, because you don't want to redo something that has already been done. And in fact, in writing papers throughout your time as a student, you probably have redone things over and over again as you're learning. But when you're writing a major thesis or dissertation, you aren't just doing something that somebody else has done before. You're trying to do something new. So you need to tell the difference between what's been done and what hasn't been done. And you discover important, relevant variables, because the literature review is going to be like a scavenger hunt. You're going to find things you might not have expected. You're going to learn things along the way. Relate ideas and theories to applications. Avoid fruitless approaches. And then finally, place your research in a historical context. You'll typically write 2 versions of your literature review during the research process. And the first one is going to be a lot longer. The first one is a comprehensive review of the literature with the objective of teaching yourself what is known about your interest area. The goal is to broadly learn what has been done and what needs to be done. Your research questions emerge from this first stage. I did a dissertation on something that I really didn't have my advisors didn't know a lot about. So I hadn't taken classes in it. So I had to learn myself. And so when I created, a literature review, I was really teaching myself in that, but I included a lot of things in that first literature review that I did not include in my dissertation because it wasn't necessary for the very specific thing I was doing. But it was necessary in the beginning for me to understand the layout of the scholarship that had been done. So then you have the second literature review, which is a focused review of the literature with the objective to inform the reader about what is known and unknown in your research area, drawn from a narrower set of literature based on the research questions developed. So just like with any write, I always overwrite, and then you have to be ready to sort of get rid of things as you focus down at the end. A lot of people ask, how long should a literature review be? And there really isn't an answer to that, although there's kind of some general guidelines. Writing and deciding the scope of the literature review is complicated. Students may ask how many articles they should cite and how many pages they should write, but that depends. General guidelines suggest that 5 to 10 reference articles is probably not enough, but more than 200 is probably too many. So somewhere between 10 and 200. Likewise, 1 to 2 pages is not enough, but more than 50 is probably too many. So that's just some broad guidelines. When you're preparing to write a literature review, a useful first step when starting your dissertation is to identify relevant keywords to help navigate through your existing literature. When researching for information, remember to give preference to primary research. You're probably going to be familiar with the terms that are going to be related to your, whatever your field, your specific area that you're focused on. And you may be more familiar, than the librarians that you will be coming to for help, but we can help you determine keywords because, we're trained to know how to do research. For instance, last year I was working on a research project in an agriculture topic, and I don't know a lot about agriculture academic research, but both of my grandfathers were farmers, so I know about I've kind of observed agriculture. And the term I used in the database when I went in was cattle when I was researching. But as I looked at the database, looked at the results that I got, I saw that the term livestock was the term that Agricola prefers, and that it was using. And so I modified my search to include the term livestock, and I got much more relevant results. So, while I didn't know that going in, I know how to pick up on that, and you will learn as you look through the databases how to pick up on and add to the lingo that you've learned in your own field. And then you use these keywords and perform an initial search of the literature using one of the citation databases. We have 261 databases that I'll show you a little bit of later, but you start out with a focused set of keywords that describe whatever your research interest is. And then, just as a general suggestion, what I think is that you should create an initial bibliography of 10 to 20 articles. And then I would probably share that with your advisor, or just sit with yourself and read through those and study through them, so that then you can go back and create another broader bibliography of 50 to 80 articles. And this would be what that I would suggest that you sort of base your review of literature on, although in the end you may not use all of those, but you start out with that pool of articles. And I think that we'll probably have later workshops that would be about how to organize those articles once you found. I know, my research was done when everything was kind of print-based, but maybe we were just transitioning to electronic. So a lot of the things I learned had to do with me having a photocopy of something and highlighting it, and I wrote notes at the top, and I had index cards, and those may still be useful for you to learn. But I think, there's also a lot of new things that can be done with the digital world. And I think, but that'll be in a future workshop. There's three main types of sources. It actually just started out, years ago, researchers just had the first two, but then they found they needed to add the third one. First one is primary sources, which are immediate firsthand accounts of a topic. In history, this might be documents like letters or diaries, or even a newspaper. In literary studies, it could be the text itself, like the works of Shakespeare or something. In social sciences, it might be census data or survey data that has been collected. And in the natural sciences, it would be reports of original research that are done. I don't think natural sciences calls it primary sources, but it is essentially the same type thing where they've done some type of lab research and written a report on it. That's primary sources. And the next one is secondary sources. These are books, articles, or reports that are based on the primary sources, such as peer-reviewed articles, as well as scholarly books. And this is going to be where the bulk of your material would come from. And the third type is tertiary sources, which are, they're ones that synthesize, they're a synthesis of the secondary sources for the general reader. Could be a textbook or an encyclopedia, or even a mass market publication like Psychology Today or National Geographic, something that takes takes an idea that was produced in a scholarly realm, but then brings it into sort of a place where the general public can read it and understand it. These are some, or this is an image that I made for the tutorial that we have that is in D2L that I'll show you, refer to you in the end, that because we have a research tutorial. But this is the publication cycle. I think it's important to sort of understand as you're looking at a topic over time to see where something might fall in the publication cycle. And the red in the left is what happens right immediately when an event occurs, and it's going to be in the broadcast news or on the web. For instance, when 9/11 happened, that it was in the newspapers, and then a day or two later, it goes to the next level, the print and online newspapers. And after that, it will go to a week or so later to the popular and news magazines. And then it's only months later that it will finally get to the scholarly and peer-reviewed journals. So and then even years later, it will be in academic books. So keep in mind, like if you're researching the pandemic that started in the middle of last year, we're only now going to start, well, it's been a little bit, the timeline's been compressed because the medical science has been so frantic to get some type of vaccine that there have been peer-reviewed things coming out in the medical sciences in a quite early fashion, but in the most cases, the peer-reviewed things won't be coming out until almost a year later. So that's something that's important I think, to keep in mind as you are researching something, especially something that's very current. And then the other thing I wanted to point out was that there are degrees of scholarship, and we can help you with figuring that out. A lot of times, people, well, now the databases will really allow you to limit to peer-reviewed journals. But I think it's important to understand that there is a degree of scholarship, even within peer-reviewed journals. I didn't know that until recently, that there's professional peer-reviewed And then there's research peer-reviewed. And professional peer-reviewed would mostly be like in nursing and medical science, and as well as things that have sort of a practical professional application. The use of sources, secondary sources should be relied on if you're making a scholarly argument, which is what you're doing, because they make up the conversation in which you are seeking to participate. And that was one thing I learned when I think I did a study of the things that were cited in the 2013 dissertations, and there were 100 dissertations that year. And it was very interesting to see there were a few things I would have steered people away from, like using Wikipedia as a place to get a definition, or there were some things that were taken out of cultural context that were taken off the internet. So those aren't really, it's not good to use sources that are not scholarly, because that's what you're trying to do. As well, I think it's important. I found a lot of things on the internet that shouldn't be there, that are in copyright, that whether they're articles or even books that have been, on the internet, and they're under copyright, and somebody can put something up on the internet until someone else becomes aware of it and complains, and that it's still there. But as researchers, I think it's important that we respect the rights of authors, and I think I don't think it would look good if we were to cite an article that would, as a web source, that was inappropriately on the web. So if you find something on the web that seems to be copied from a print source and it shouldn't be there, come to the library and we'll help you track down the original print source, because that would be the one that you should, that I feel you should ethically cite. A lot of people, so now we're sort of turning to the point of doing the research, to finding the sources. And people will come in the library and they'll say, where are the books? And the black and white picture here, that's the Cincinnati Library in 1874. And you can see they've got lots of books there. And the image on the right is our current library. That whole area 20 years ago when I started was full of reference books, and now it's full of computers. And we've gotten rid of a lot of our print books. And our preference for over 10 years in getting new books has been to get ebooks. So the books, the print books are less visible. We have fewer of them, but we actually have a lot more material that we have access to electronically. And that's that we're learning to use when we use the 21st century library. And you can do research on the internet. You can find things just in Google. However, the library offers a systematic and productive method for discovering useful and credible sources. Before you can use sources, you must first learn to find and evaluate them. Some materials that will eventually serve as sources may be physically located in the library, but others are likely to be located elsewhere, whether a physical or virtual space. And more than likely, the majority of the material that you all will be citing will be something that you've accessed digitally. The library, so the physical library isn't as important now. What the library really is in the 21st century is a portal to these sources. And you can rely on the research expertise of librarians to find relevant material. So instead of just like pointing people to books and saying it's on that shelf, or this is how you use this print index, what the librarians do now is really provide direction on how to maneuver through the digital world. And it's important for you to explore the online databases, to be familiar with what is in them, especially those that are the most relevant to the field that you're studying. And like I said, we've got 261. You can't know everything. I mean, I don't even probably know the names of all the ones we have, but I know the main ones, and I know the way you search in them is the same, in even though they might look quite slightly different. But you need to be familiar with the databases that are going to be relevant to your main, to what your subject area is. Along with books, online databases are a valuable asset of the library. Like journals, databases are subscription items, and each library subscriptions will vary based on local need and resources. Some databases are general, while others are subject specific, like science or history or education, literature. You should become familiar with the major databases in your field to which the library subscribes, and you should learn how to use them. The research process. Remember that the research process is not linear. In the past, people, if they were looking for a book and maybe they didn't want that book, but they wanted something like that book, or in addition to it, we would tell them, go find it on the shelf and look at the books that are around it. Because of the way that books are organized with a call number, the things that are next to them on the shelf are going to be about similar topics. So it was really common for researchers to just go and browse the shelves and just look at what was next to the book that they'd been reading. And that can be done electronically as well. Finding an article can lead forward or backward to the articles it cites or the ones that cite it. Because some of the databases will allow you to, you can click right into the articles that have cited something, or that have been cited in that article, but you can also go forward and look at the things that have cited it. And you can find subject terms that are related to the articles that you find useful for future searches. The internet can also be used for academic research, but I think it's very important to understand how to use it as a tool. It's useful to get your bearings with respect to a new topic. Regarding everything you learn is provisional. So in the same way, certainly in the same way that you might ask a friend, what do you know about this idea? You can go on the internet and look that up. But keep in mind, everything you read there, you need to try to verify it somewhere else. You can explore potential keywords to use in a more systematic search. I often will go to Wikipedia and look up something like climate change so that I can see what are the other terms that are being, that I might use in a database to describe that idea. Sometimes the ideas have a different connotation, like climate change and global warming have slightly different connotations, and they might be political to some people. But knowing that they are talking about the same general idea is important to know when I want to gather together all the keywords that I might use to find articles that are relevant to what I want. The internet can also be used to remind yourself of dates or facts, but checking against a more reliable source. So if you just, I know in social work, people were always wanting to research, or used to want to research, like when a particular act of Congress or something like the Social Security legislation came through or something, and they just want a general date so that they'll know what time period that they're working with. And you can use the internet for something like that, but I wouldn't cite it in anything that I was writing, but just to get a general idea. Also, it's good, you can locate the authors or sources you might wish to contact. In the tutorial that I talked about, I have a part in that where I show people how to find the university information about an author. Maybe you want to figure out, how can I contact this author? One of the things that people frequently want to do in education is use a survey instrument that someone might have developed for their dissertation. And if you know how to contact them, you can ask them. And so we can find that on the internet, find where they're, where they're currently teaching. And also Google Scholar can find some material not indexed in the databases. Especially there are dissertations that are produced at universities that are not part of the ProQuest system, or they don't submit their material to ProQuest, so it's not going to be indexed there. And you can find that listed in Google Scholar. Avoid common mistakes. These are just some general common mistakes I thought of, that not employing the best keywords and identifying the best sources. And that's where the librarians can help you with coming up with that. Not relating your study's findings to the findings of the literature review. And that is really an essential part of writing the literature review, and making sure that what you've got in the literature review connects to to the rest of your document, your thesis or your dissertation. Relying on secondary rather than primary sources, or tertiary rather than secondary sources. Always try to go back to the best source. The secondary source you have may identify a primary source, or the secondary source could, or the tertiary source could identify a secondary source. But in this day and age, when we've got access to so much, and even if this library doesn't have direct access to it, we can get a copy of it from somewhere else. There's no need that you would have to rely on an inadequate source. We can usually always trace back to the original best document that will be used for your purposes. And also, don't blindly accept other researchers' findings rather than critically examine them. So anything that you find in the database, or that you read in an article, don't make sure that you study it for yourself. There was I had an example from a few years ago where I found an article in the World Shakespeare Bibliography that had something about Shakespeare living in Belgium and getting drunk and being arrested, and something I'd never heard of that had happened. And I wrote a couple of Shakespeare scholars that are at other universities asking them about it. And I found out later that article was a reproduction. It was reproduced in a magazine that was for Belgian people that were living around the world. But the original place that it was published was in a Belgian newspaper on April 1st. So it was actually an April Fool's joke. But because it had been reproduced in another magazine and then picked up by World Shakespeare Bibliography, who evidently did not, recognize that it was an April Fool's joke, they had it in the database like it was a real thing. And it made me look kind of stupid that I was asking these people. So, make sure that, even if it's in a database, it can be questioned. And that's all of the presentation. Now I'm going to try to figure out how to switch to the, show you the, were there any, Fatima or Megan or Sarah, I don't know if y'all, were there any questions before I do that?
Yeah, Scott, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, there were 3 questions that I grabbed off of the chat, and it looks like another one came in. So doing them in the order that they came in from, the first question was, would broadcast news and web be considered a primary source since it's the day of the event?
Yes. Well, yes, it would. I mean, I would kind of put a caveat on that. It would, I mean, it could be reporting something secondhand, like that Shakespeare thing that was an example where they were reproducing an article from somewhere else. But if it's reporting firsthand news, then yeah, it's a primary source.
Okay. And then the next question was about archive.org, arxiv.org, an open source collection of scholarly articles that Cornell maintains in STEM areas.
Yes.
They are not peer reviewed. Is this not a good source to use in a review?
Well, it's not peer reviewed, but I think you could consider it scholarly. And I mean, it would depend on your advisor, I think, and probably the circumstances of the article as well, like the reputation of the writer. Like it could be a highly respected writer who had published in, who was well known in the field, but for whatever reason, maybe it's a pre-publication or I don't know what it might be, but. Yes.
If you don't mind, I'm actually looking at the archive website, and basically it's just a collection of citations. Some of them are coming from conference proceedings, so those would not necessarily be considered peer review, but some of them, they're actually giving the journal citation, so you could actually look that journal up to see if that is a peer review journal. So it's not peer reviewed by Cornell, they're just maintaining a list of the resources. But some of these articles are actually in peer-reviewed journals. You would just have to look up the journal. Sorry, Scott.
And I mean, in the end, it's anything that's not peer reviewed. If what you want is peer reviewed, if that's what then it's, some things aren't peer reviewed. They're scholarly, but they're not peer reviewed. But it depends on your topic too. I think I mean, it would be, by and large, I think, peer-reviewed things would be the first thing to go to, but it would be situational if like the only thing that there is something that's scholarly and can be verified and comes from a reputable thing, but it's not peer-reviewed. I mean, in some circumstances, I might consider it, but it would just depend on the situation. Do y'all think that, Sarah, you think that sort of sounds okay?
No, I think that's a good summation. There's a lot of stuff that is scholarly that won't necessarily go through peer review. I would consider a conference proceeding for an academic conference a good example of that. So, and
as long as you make clear in what you're writing, don't try to pass it off as peer reviewed. Anyway, it's like Wikipedia. If you just understand what it is, you can make some use out of it, but don't try to use it for something it's not. What was the other question?
Okay, 2 more questions if we got time.
Yes.
Is there a good resource to use to help ensure literature reviews don't contain plagiarism?
Well, you can submit it through, the student can't do it directly, but your advisor can submit it through Authenticate. And I think Grammarly has some kind of thing that individual students can subscribe to, but I don't know how much it costs or what it looks like or anything. But and I can submit documents through Authenticate and work with people with I mean, I can point out where something's plagiarized because, it's just where something should have had been had quotation marks around it. The thing that the graduate school is interested in when they put something through Authenticate, they're assuming that there's no plagiarism, but that what they want to know is how much of this is original. And so the graduate school is interested in having having it the non-original material while always properly quoted and not plagiarized, that it be kept below a certain amount. So you just have to work with your advisor to do that, or you can come. I can help you with. I can put a chapter of a dissertation through or something. Okay. Was there another question?
Yes, one last question. Are government reports considered acceptable sources? For example, a report prepared for by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Yeah, I think, Sarah, wouldn't you say that would be a primary source, most likely? I mean, statistics are going to come from someplace like that, and those are primary sources.
Yeah, a lot of government documents are considered primary sources because they're being created by that specific committee, or it's testimony, or something like that. So yeah, Scott's right. It definitely falls within primary sources.
Okay. Well, now I'm going to try to share my screen so you can see the library homepage. Do you see the library homepage? Okay. Well, before we look at the databases, which is the main thing I wanted to do, I wanted to point out a few things. First, I guess you all know how to get to the library homepage. If you just add a /library to the URL of the university, that will take you to the library. If you want to reach one of us, and the Sarah Northam, Fatima Kolusi Raftar, did I pronounce that right, Fatima? And Megan Farrell are the four of us are the ones that you would contact. But any of us might be monitoring this chat with a librarian, and I guess one of us is right now, because if I clicked on that, I would be chatting with somebody. If it doesn't say chat, it's going to go to an email, and you would send your thing by email. Otherwise, you can look under help and contact a librarian. And here's the four of us. You can see, although I'm not in my office, don't try to call me, but probably the best way to reach any of us would be by email. We have subject specialties that we kind of focus on, but we can answer questions to anybody. And also, I wanted you to understand about interlibrary loan, that there's going to be a lot of material that we don't have, either physically or we don't have access to, and don't pay for anything. Go to interlibrary loan and we'll get books or we'll get articles for you. And then we have research guides, which we are writing. And in fact, I just finished one not long ago on literature review that probably I'm going to want to revise a lot now. If you go to owner here and then look there's one for literature review. And these are things that we put together that summarize ideas and push out information about research. And there will be guides in here that are within sciences and in humanities and in education. And we're going to be including writing more of these research guides. And then you see one search here, that's a federated search that will look in all of the databases of the or most of the 261 that we have, as well as the catalog, which are going to be the books. But if you click on databases, these are the 261 databases that we currently subscribe to. You might keep your eye over here on the right for new trial databases. If you go to subject, this is where you can pick a particular subject for to see the databases that are within that subject. Some of them are going to be just for that, like MathSciNet, and other ones like Academic Search Complete. That's a broad database that covers all fields. And this is where I think it's really important for you to come to and familiarize yourself with the different databases in your field, because while the material in them will overlap and there will be things you will find in multiple databases, there will be unique things that are in a subject-specific database that might not be in a general database. And also there are search features in some of the databases, like with the psychology database has a methodology search that is not in the other databases. So look at find your subject. And this is not exhaustive because your field could be in something that crosses over to something else. These are just, we selected what goes into what category, but because of the the particular nature of your research topic, there could actually be, it could be a business topic, but maybe it might be, I don't know, maybe there's some faith aspect of it that would make it cross over into the religion and philosophy database, or so that is something that the librarians can help you with. But these are good places to start. I think it's important for you to also look over, or at least understand, the different database types to understand what is in the database. The 12 databases that are abstract and index databases don't have full text. They just identify this thing exists. There's an article about this, and they have an abstract, so they'll have like a summary of it. But if you want to get it, you got to get it somewhere else. The full text databases, 39 of them, those will have links to the full text of the article. We have multidisciplinary databases, 21, that would be like Academic Search Complete. Those cover all fields. I think it's important to understand when you're in a subject-specific database, you know that everything in that database is about from your field, like it's going to be about education or it's going to be about business. If I'm looking for articles about leadership in secondary school administration, if I'm in an education database, I know everything is about education. But if I go to a general database like Academic Search Complete and put in something about leadership, if I use that as my keyword, I'm going to come up with leadership in all kinds of other different areas. So it's important to understand how to search in a multidisciplinary database. And then there's the news and current events, which is where you would find primary sources. And some of our newspapers go back hundreds of years. And you would find those news articles there. And then there's also a primary sources type.
Oh, thank you.
There's a reference type that I think is really important for the beginning of your research process, where it's, when we had our reference research area, the print reference, people would just go there when they're starting out and like look in the Encyclopedia of Education or a dictionary of some type and find things. Well, now those you know, we still have a few print reference things, but they're up in the stacks with everything else. And maybe you all are at home, not even in the building, but you can come to the one of these reference databases and find something that will give you that really broad overview about something that might help you focus down onto what specific thing you want to look at. And then finally, the statistics is important, I think. You can also find statistics like in government websites, whether it's the TEA, Texas website for education statistics, or federal government. But we have statistic databases as well that have numbers in them. And then there's the database vendors that most of our databases come from ProQuest or EBSCO, but you can see we've got a lot of different ones. Well, that was all that I had planned because it was so broad that with people from all different fields, I really didn't, want to go into detail about how to do research in one field when it wouldn't be relevant to the other. So if you have any feedback or suggestions about particular things that you would need for your own research area, whether it's in computer science or literature or whatever, then let us know and we can do a more focused workshop on a specific field. But this was supposed to just be kind of a broad thing about what is a literature review, and generally show you what the databases are, because that is where you're going to pull the material that you would include in your literature review. And I don't, Megan or Fatima or Sarah, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Hold on, Scott. I'm trying to get my video on. The only thing I would add, thank you, Scott, for the presentation. Keep an eye out for more presentations for the library. We're doing a couple presentations. We've got one coming up on citations with RefWorks. And then we've also got one coming up on power searching tools. So, and then of course, make sure you contact the librarians if you guys need help. That's what we're here for. So thank you, Scott, for your time today.
Okay, thank you. And I'll send out a link to this to anybody that wants to review it. Thank you.